Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. All right, John Middlekauff, his podcast at The Volume is 3 and Out. A former NFL scout. People love him. I was at a party 2 nights ago. And I said, I worked at The Volume. Some guy kind of knew me, and he goes, hey, I like the Middlekauff guy. And I said, well, so do I. So we have something in common, and I just met you for the first time, and so let's bring him on. We got a lot of stuff, a lot of ground to cover on this. I want to start with this. It's an interesting one, not that it is that important. But because I have a place in Chicago, John, and I love Chicago. I could live in Chicago. I probably wouldn't want to live there December, January, February, but I love Chicago. My wife loves it. And so I know a lot of media people there. So the other day, I've always found this funny that to some regard, you and I are information brokers. We get information and it changes all the time. And then I give it to the audience when I get it. So I had been told a while, about 8, 9, 10 weeks ago, and Caleb Williams' dad had done some talking. He's a big personality about some things he wanted, and Caleb started getting kind of a entitled rep, and I think Caleb probably told his dad, hey, can you chill a little? Yeah. So I'd said something on the air. I don't think Caleb's in love with Chicago. I don't think they really want to go there. Caleb's people reached out to me and said, hey, we don't want to be painted like that, first of all. We know we're not going to do an Elway. Like if we get picked, we're going to make it work. And I think that's the right attitude to have. That said, I was told USC has been called by 5 different NFL teams doing background checks. People are going to make offers to the Bears. So let's start from that premise. Would you be surprised if multiple teams didn't call the Bears and make offers, big packages?
100% they're going to get offers. I think under no circumstances there's not an offer unless you view the gap between the next guy as borderline, like minuscule. You could not take him. Like you have no choice. Now, listen, scouting's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's not objective. It's not black and white. There are people that view quarterbacks. I mean, there are going to be some teams that have a quarterback that goes 3rd or 4th in this draft that might be their favorite quarterback. Right. So there's no guarantee. I
know a team that loves Bo Nix, not Caleb level, but they think he's the second best quarterback in the draft.
Well, Caleb, part of the reason why he's such a fascinating prospect is because of his physical skills. What did the Bears just do? They hired Shane Waldron, who is a Shanahan McVay. It's a very quarterback friendly. So you could argue, well, if Washington or the Raiders, someone's throwing the farm at you, we don't have to move back that far, especially with Washington. What if Washington said, hey, we want to move up one spot? They play it pretty easily. Like, we're open for business. We're open to listening to anything. We'll give you the following year's number 1. You just move back one spot. You still get the quarterback you want or you're willing to take, and you get an extra first-round pick. In that offense, I'm telling you, did you read the Jets story about the Saleh and everything going on?
Yes.
One thing I was told is when Robert Saleh interviewed for the job, is one of their big pitches, he brought LaFleur's brother with him, who came from Kyle, is that in this offense, there are 60, 65 plays a game. We want to run it for over half. That's the Shanahan way. And then let's say there are 25 to 30 pass attempts. Ideally, half, if not 20 of those 30 pass attempts are going to be schemed, easy passes. Then I'm going to need the quarterback to make 10-ish plays. Josh Allen has to make 30 of those. Mahomes has to make a lot. In this offense, it's very quarterback friendly. So you could argue, go with the Drake May, go with whoever your favorite quarterback is, and add the picks. Now, I would not do that. I think the risk of having a guy with this much talent, I watched some Drake May. Maybe I watched a bad stretch, but like 3 straight games in the middle of the year. I was like, God, I thought he was supposed to be like Justin Herbert. I'm not quite seeing this. Bo Nix, listen, I don't know. Jaden Daniels, I have the Arizona bad taste in my mouth from years ago. You got to adapt. I haven't watched him enough, but he's clearly a guy a lot of people like. But I'm with you. I think that I knew people at Oklahoma And the Caleb Williams dad thing was a really big deal when he was 18. Obviously, then he
Yeah,
transferred.
yeah.
You don't get to call Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, Belichick, and Pete Carroll and expect them to pick up your phone when you're a father or mother. All right. This is the big leagues. That's why they pay you the money. But I think Caleb made the right decision. Like, you want to stop that because there are already some question marks. This is not Andrew Luck when you're like, this is really, it can't be.
No.
Like, he did have the thing on his fingernails and, his play. He's a really good prospect, but it was a little up and down at moments.
Yeah.
He can have the hero ball syndrome. There are legitimate questions, which for every prospect except like 5 in the history of sports, there are going to be some question marks.
Well, and I think it's and I went on Chicago radio for a couple stations. Again, I want to be friendly. Chicago's a place I spend a lot of time, and I have real respect for Chicago media. It's New York, LA, Chicago, Dallas, Boston. There's some really good media. I mean, there's some really big market media that I have a lot of respect for.
It's an elite sports city.
Oh, it's. I mean, the teams are a mess, but come on, it's big, loud, passionate.
Yeah.
It's great, and it's my favorite big city in the country. But I do think sometimes you can live in a tunnel, and there is a sense. I think there's a greater perception of the Bears. One of their bragging points is, we lost a lot of close games. Well, shit. Mostly in this league, unless you're awful, everybody loses close games. But I try to implore to them, guys, if you were Caleb Williams, think about this. Brett Favre had 8 years in Green Bay. Some of those when it was a run-first league, 8 times in Green Bay, once in Minnesota, 30 touchdown passes or more. Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay had 8 of those. Jordan Love in his first year starting had 1. 17 times with those 3 quarterbacks, 30 touchdowns or more. The Bears have never had a quarterback that's done that, ever. And they've had 13 coordinators offensively in 26 years. It is an S show offensively. So don't be shocked if the dad 8-9 weeks ago I had heard from the camp, like, they're not in love with this place. And again, dad saying one thing, son saying another. But I just think people will use this example. Well, the Bengals were bad, and then Joe Burrow. And to that I say, Kenny Anderson got to a Super Bowl. Boomer Esiason got to a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow got to a Super Bowl. Carson Palmer was fantastic, 3-time Pro Bowler. And Andy Dalton.
Marvin Lewis had some really good teams.
I think went to 5 playoffs. So it's like 5 times Cincinnati's gotten the quarterback right. Chicago never has. So for anybody that thinks everybody in Caleb's camp is, we can't wait. There are reservations. They're not, if they get picked, they're going. But this place in the history of the league, the worst offensive franchise, is the Bears. They've never had a 4,000-yard quarterback.
I don't think what people understand is, and I knew Matt Nagy really, really well, and I had some other buddies that work in the organization. It's a mom and pop operation.
Like the Lakers.
Because, so if you think about the first 2 picks, you got the Bears, and then you got Washington. Well, what's Washington? This new rich guy who is a big progressive thinker, who's willing to be on the forefront of everything. No expense is too small for him he'll be aggressive. He'll do whatever. If Dan Quinn doesn't work in a couple of years, they'll pivot. Exactly. Hey, Cliff, we'll double your salary. What do you do? Doc Rivers, Nick Nurse. If now Embiid's hurt, he'll be aggressive to do something else. The Bears are the complete opposite. Like they romanticize about the 85 Bears. It's 2024, guys. I mean, there's a large gap between those 2 teams. Right. So I don't think people quite, just because it's a big brand and a big city, they do not operate like Kroenke or Jerry or Jeffrey Lurie or now this 40. They don't have the money. They're a team that bought the franchise a long, long time ago. So listen, and I heard you say this, and it's so correct. If they were to start with all this momentum this offseason and these picks, what if they start 0-3 or 2-5? Like Eberflus is got first coach fired written all over him.
Well, yeah, and people say, well,
I thought it was crazy, Colin, to bring him back with all the options on the open market. Given you got the number, this was the time to pivot. And it's classic organization. They're wired like the 70s and 80s. It's insane. I thought it was a mistake.
People say, well, why is Washington?
Nothing against the guy. He had a good second half defensively, but come on.
And again, people say, well, why do you like the Washington space for, blank quarterback? And my takeaway is because Dan Quinn and his staff, they're going to pay elite money to get an elite staff. and he can go 1-5 his second year. He's not going to get fired.
Yeah.
So
probably got a 6-year contract.
Yeah. So I think sometimes, and I don't blame Chicago, you're taking local calls. Once you move in a market and live in a market, you do kind of root for your local team because it makes your sportscast, your show more interesting. But I do think the idea that, and Caleb's going to go to the Bears if they pick him, but not everybody. I mean, Caleb's done a good job to say, guys, there's a way to work here. It's like Houston, defensive coach. But again, D'Amico came in with a new staff, a 5-year contract or 4-year contract. The bottom line is 5 games into Eberflus and Caleb Williams, they could be moving on to another staff or at least want to. Anyway.
We wouldn't have this opinion if they would have got rid of Eberflus and hired Vrabel with Arthur Smith. We'd be like, God, that's a viable franchise now.
Absolutely different. Totally different ball game. I have nothing against Eberflus, but I have 2 executives in the league who know him or have interviewed with him. And they're like, listen, he doesn't capture the room. There's an argument to be made. He's a great coordinator. Verdict's out if he's a great coach. But that's okay. It's just the point being is I've got some good sourcing on Caleb, and he's a good kid. He's emotional. He's all about winning, and he's going to go to Chicago. But I mean, you got to take a deep breath if you are a Bears fan or live in Chicago. This is the worst franchise in the league historically on offense. They do not have a 4,000-yard quarterback ever, which is
crazy.
Hard to do. It like the league wants you. The league basically is the opposite college football. They want parity. They don't want Mahomes dominating the league. It's just Mahomes is great. So let's pivot to this. Jim Harbaugh, who could have never gotten a Chicago job because they wouldn't pay for him, and he doesn't get along with the president, who was the former Big Ten president. Could you make? I had Harbaugh on Friday, and I really like him, and I always have. And I think maybe, John, I just like people. I support people who are smart and successful that the audience rallies against. And Harbaugh, because he's different and a disruptor, he's Uber, and the NFL and college football can be a taxi. He is going to shake shit up, and I love him for it. But could I make the argument he was always a better NFL coach, and he would have been, he's built for the NFL because he doesn't placate. And college football increasingly is about kissing butt, and the NFL is about winning, and he's a winner.
When I watched him on your show and kind of make the media rounds, when I was around Harbaugh with the 49ers and going to practices, he had this like huge chip on his shoulder, which was kind of weird, right? A lot of coaches that all they'd ever done was coach trying to prove themselves. He was already really famous. His brother was an NFL head coach. Yet he had this chip on his shoulder, like everyone had overlooked him his whole life and everyone was out to get him. And you watch him now, I feel like I see a different guy.
Same.
Definitely a more mature in the way he used to have this huge pushback against, I think, the media in a weird way, even though he could, when he wanted to put on the charm, he could. If you watched him over the last week, he put on the charm, kind of embraced it. Like, it's not worth it me fighting this. I don't have the energy at 60 years old. He looks definitely healthier. He's thinner than he was back 10 years ago. I watched a guy that's just very at peace with where he's at and kind of knows what he's doing and isn't insecure is probably the wrong way to put it, but just is pretty dialed in. And listen, he can be over the top with the way he talks about players and stuff and Herbert, but I don't see how they don't win, and they don't win immediately.
Have you seen their schedule? Jesus.
No, I don't know.
The road schedule is Atlanta, Carolina.
He plays the South. Oh, that's the wins.
So the road schedule, in only one game, Kansas City, will they have the second best quarterback? They'll have the best quarterback in every game. The home schedule, now, Burrow, but it's at home. Lamar Jackson at home. So they get some tougher quarterbacks at home. John, they lost 12 games, 7 by a field goal or fewer, most in the league by far. You can't tell me Staley to Harbaugh is not a 5-point swing. I don't think it's crazy to think they're an 11-win team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Harbaugh from the 49ers, where, for the first time in his life, I mean, he was fired. He was basically told, you're not good enough because you're crazy, even though that aged pretty well on his side. And then he went to Michigan, and remember, he changed his offense midway through to kind of this modern spread, and he clearly hated it. And I think once he got back to his roots, he knows his way works. So he is very secure of like my old school way of football, which ironically, Kyle Shanahan's an old school guy, runs the ball, play defense, still works when it matters the most. He's proven it these last 3 years in Michigan. I think you're getting a guy that's pretty dialed, obviously. I mean, you just saw him win the national championship. But to me, you get a guy who's less abrasive. I mean, there were some stories with the 49ers like, damn, I could understand being the owner and people getting the checks. This is kind of absurd.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're quite getting that guy anymore. And this is where I would imagine the Spanos family feels a lot better about this. He's not going to be fighting them all the time.
Well, think about this. Stanford, complete turnaround job. Niners, complete turnaround job. Michigan, complete turnaround job. Is part of what you see. He's like, shit, if we don't win 11 games, I can't coach. Receiver, left tackle, quarterback, back, 2 edge rushers.
High pick. Also, last year's draft, 2nd and 3rd picks, couple of guys front 7 defensively, Thule for USC, and the linebacker from the Pac-12, Washington State. I think Jim looks at this and thinks, how did they not win 9-10 games? I think this is the first job he's had where he walks in and think, if I hit on 3 draft picks and we're reasonably healthy, we can win our division. It's not a turnaround. It's not a gut job. Well, here's the other thing. In the NFL, unlike college, now you have GM, essentially guys in college that help you run your recruiting. You need them with the transfer portal. But ultimately, the head coach is essentially the GM in college. You need a GM in the pros. A guy that can, from practice squad to college to free agency, there's a lot going on. And during the season, your only tunnel vision is coaching the team and the next week's game. And I think Harbaugh, what he went through with Trent Baalke, he gets a Harbaugh guy, this dude from Baltimore, which clearly he's very, very comfortable with. And John Spanos, he was pretty openly talking about it in the press conference. He likes him a lot. And John plays a role in scouting. So he's clearly very comfortable with their structure, which is key because the best coaches right now, ultimately Andy and Kyle and McVay, they're the highest guy in the total. They make the most money, but they trust their GM because they need him. And you cannot, his success, he's going to need to lean on this guy. So he needed a guy they could trust. They hired a guy. Like, think of all the success he's had now, taking guys from his brother. It's the one guy in the NFL he can really lean on. So when he says, hey, this guy's worth it, he's taking defensive coordinators. Now he takes an assistant, scouting director to make him his GM. I just think he's in a much better suited from a personal dynamic standpoint. I mean, that 49er team he took over turned out to be pretty loaded with a lot of talent. That team's more talented than this one, but the quarterback situation is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about a little bit about the Super Bowl, but I really want to dial in on Brock Purdy. So I saw a stat that was interesting. I don't think you deny this. 5 of the 8 playoff quarters for Brock Purdy have not been good, and they've been a favorite, and they've been at home. So Brock Purdy's rate of negatively graded dropbacks in the playoffs has been 23%. So that's bad. That would have been the worst in the NFL of any quarterback with 200-plus dropbacks. He's been bad in the playoffs. He's had a couple of great late drives. Mahomes, who had a much, much lower, a very good negative dropback rate, right? Very few. It's been even better in the playoffs. It's like 6% to Purdy's 23%. And he's gone on the road twice against, Green Bay's defense and Detroit's defense. I mean, one's crap. The other one's average. Buffalo's defense and the Baltimore defenses, especially Baltimore's much better than Green Bay and Detroit. So Mahomes, against much better defenses, on the road has almost no negative dropbacks, almost none. Purdy at home against bad defenses has an egregiously bad negative dropback rate. So my take is, I think this Kansas City's defense is elite. Most people just don't know anybody outside of maybe Snead and Chris Jones, but they can frickin' move. If Purdy struggles, and I like the under as my favorite bet in this game. I think it's low scoring. If Purdy struggles, really coughs it up, could you argue Kyle goes, he got outplayed for 3 quarters by Love, outplayed by 2.5 quarters by lousy in the Super Bowl, that Sam Darnold would go into camp battling Purdy and whoever played better would win that job?
Well, I think that is a big swing guy for him because I was texting with some people. Sam just signed a 1-year contract, and the 49ers love him, but so does Adam Peters, who's now in Washington. And, maybe depending on who you draft, you bring him, you pay him a little bit more money. You kind of make him the bridge quarterback. You let that guy kind of ease into his NFL career. So that is a team to watch when it comes to Sam Darnold. I do think the 49ers are very, very loyal to this guy. They really like him. Like, one thing happened when Trey Lance was pretty bad for them in his starts. The team never really gravitated toward him. And when I say the team, I mean their star core players. That group, he's beloved in the locker room, Brock Purdy. And that buys you a lot of juice with this team. Trent Williams, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, these guys are not going anywhere, and they're some of the best players in the league. The other thing is Kyle is, even in the struggles, when you can run his offense, that was the problem with Trey. He had to change his offense, and he's like, my whole thing is my offense. So that's why they loved Purdy, and I'm sure you saw the story. Jed York told him that Kyle, in 2022 in training camp, said, hey, I think this is 2 weeks in, the best quarterback on the roster is this guy we just drafted in the 7th round. And they're like, what? And he wasn't making that up. Now, I was going to those practices. It's hard to tell because he's running with the threes, but they kept him on the roster for a reason. Like, the coach really liked him. The rain situation in Green Bay, he was really bad. I do think the second half against Detroit, I thought their defense really let them down. The 49ers are an offensive team. When you go back to the last Super Bowl these two teams played, the Niners were a defensive team and the Chiefs were an unreal offensive team. Well, look at this year. The Niners are the third scoring offense. They're very dependent on Brock playing well and scoring a lot of points because their defense the last couple of weeks, it's really been leaking oil for a while. And the Chiefs are the number 2 overall scoring defense. So this is actually a clash between the 49ers offense and the Chiefs defense, but their offense goes as Brock plays. So when he's a little off, their defense is no longer dominant. So
it's not.
For them to win the Super Bowl, to me, he's got to be way better than he was because I don't have as much faith on the defense. John Lynch was just their defensive coordinator was saying they were embarrassed by the effort in the NFC Championship game. So the defense is going through some stuff. Now, when Deebo's healthy, they just have so many options, and you can run the ball with Christian McCaffrey. They throw a lot of quick screens. They just need Brock not to turn it over, and that's the one thing. He's had a lot of turnover-worthy plays, and when he was really humming throughout the season, when they were beating the shit out of Dallas and Philly, he was not doing that. So it just depends what guy you get. And this gets back to, you and I will, I'm sure when the draft gets close and when the draft happens, the character of these guys, the mindset of these guys. Brock's a pretty serious dude. So he's gone through, it's been a rough little stretch for him. But I think they like where he's at mentally. And I have actually more faith in him, the guy and the wiring, than I do sometimes the physical attributes. Obviously, he's a pretty good runner, but his arm, can be a little hit or miss sometimes.
Yeah, I always said Dak Prescott's intangibles are an A. His tangibles are like a C plus B minus. He moves up. I mean, he really throws an average ball. I think the other thing with Brock Purdy, if I was a Niner fan, I'd be a little concerned is Andy Reid and Spags, 2 weeks, is that Purdy rain struggled, road not as good. Big games, he's been a tad tight. People also, John, they have more film. You got a lot on Brock now. Whereas with Garoppolo, we knew his limitations. That's why I think Brock Purdy moving is essential, because it doesn't matter how much film you have. If you can move, you can move. You don't know when it's coming. But I do think Spags, and I think the Chiefs have the best corners in the league. I think if they can generate a pass rush, if I was facing Purdy, my takeaway would be crowd Deebo, take out the bubble screens, be prepared for him. Don't let him run. Brock on play action stuff. Stop the run. Take your chances with Ayuk over the top. If he beats you, he beats you. But take those bubble screens away from Deebo where he's a train downhill. I don't know. I don't think San Francisco is going to generate a ton of offense. You've acknowledged that San Francisco's pass rush is
hasn't been playing well. Oh,
it's kind of hit and miss outside of Bosa.
I think ideally Kyle Shanahan at his core is wired like a guy from the 80s or the 90s, like his dad. He wants to run the ball, and they run the ball to do 2 things: establish just a physical, set the tone physically and prove that we're tougher than you. And then their entire passing game is off that. All the play action stuff that leads to a lot of easy completions. It's why when they're successful running the ball with McCaffrey, their offense can look pretty easy because guys get wide open because you're biting on the run. And then guys, they have so much talent with their offensive weapons When you can slow down the run, it throws them off a little bit. So to me, it kind of starts with Christian McCaffrey. It's why a lot of people are saying he was the MVP throughout the year, because he is. He's one of the best players in the league. They said something on the AFC Championship game. It was either Nance or Romo that the Chiefs led the league this year in batted passes at the line of scrimmage, like their defensive line. Well, what happened a couple times against the Lions? Hutchinson's like 6'7", batted a couple balls down. Do they bat 4 balls down? Well, if you only get 28, 30 pass attempts, or, Kyle ideally would be 25, that's 4 wasted passes, right? Or does it happen once? Because sometimes Kyle's schemed pass is why it's going to work, either as a big first down or an explosive play. If you tip that ball, and you can with Brock because he's a shorter player, it can throw you off. That's some little thing to keep an eye on, because they bat a lot of balls, and Brock has some balls to get batted. So do they try? I don't ever understand why Kyle doesn't move it. Now, his offense is not a drop back passing game where they do sprint options, but I would try to get him on the move a little bit more. But that's not really part of the Shanahan, operation.
So I've made the comment before, John, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, that winning is second in the NFL for owners to winning on their terms. The Spanoses, to their credit, finally said, we're going to give up some power in the building because we got the right quarterback. We don't have a Super Bowl win. We're going to go with Harbaugh. By and large, Vrabel, Belichick, who would have wanted similar personnel, say, didn't get offered a job. They're obviously much more qualified than many of the young defensive coordinators. 5 of the 8 coaches were on the defensive side. So in 2021, of the 13 playoff wins, 12 were from offensive coaches. In 2022, of the 13 playoff wins, 12 again were from offensive coaches. This year, Andy, Kyle, both offensive guys, 9 of 13 will be offensive coaches. How surprised were you that 5 of the 8 head coaching hires, again, these guys have no power, no leverage, not big salaries outside of maybe Dan Quinn. Maybe, I don't know what his is. Were you surprised they went back to young, unproven defensive side of the ball guys?
Well, I don't think there was a great crop of Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur types, right? There was one, and he wouldn't leave. And there have been some rumors Ben Johnson didn't interview well. He wanted a lot of money.
I heard that.
He is a fantastic offensive coach, right? You watch his offense, so you might look past that. One thing's pretty clear, and this goes back to the Harbaugh thing. The amount of money you're paying these guys. What's a first-time no-name head coach now making? $8 million. If you have a little bit of a resume, Dan Quinn, you're probably starting at 12, 13. And then obviously the Harbaugh types are 16 to 20. So you're paying a lot of money. And then a guy like Vrabel won't listen to anybody. And I'm a Mike Vrabel guy, but I could understand if you put me on if I was running the team, like, wait, you're just going to be a dick to me, pass me in the hallway, not even acknowledge me. That's more of a Belichick thing. Not listen to my GM. Ultimately, this is my team, and you're not getting along with it. Andy Reid, ask Jeffrey Lurie what he thinks of him. Loves him. Got along with people. Pete Carroll, easy to deal. He's nice. There is an element, even Kyle Shanahan, who can be cantankerous, kind of edgy, does get along with Sean McVay. And I think part of that, once you get this kind of, it kind of carries with you that you don't get along with people at the price points. It's not great. The other thing with Bill, at 72 years old, Bill's not going to come in and be like, yeah, just let me coach the team, hire whoever you want to be the GM. He picks the players. That GM, what's he going to do? Tell Bill who to take? So it was a tough situation, but how could you give Bill the keys to the Ferrari, even though I think Atlanta should have hired? Listen, you get a chance to get Bill Belichick, get some buzz. But I do understand the reservations from the other side of Bill, we've seen your drafts. You're known for not listening to anybody. The Patriots have a draft board with really talented scouts, and then Bill just goes rogue. So it's how can we trust you to do that? And part of Bill's deal is you're hiring me. You got to let me do everything. He's not saying, well, I'll just coach the team. You guys pick the players. So I guess it's not that shocking with those two guys. I think the defensive coaches gets back to, there just wasn't a good crop of offensive guys. I mean, and once Ben Johnson didn't want in, who were the other offensive coordinators? Shanahan has a bunch of young guys that he just promoted because he's lost guys the last couple of years. Bobby Slowick's a guy with D'Amico, very young. I mean, he was working at PFF 5 years ago. So we might be 2 years away from kind of that crew. The Bobby Slowicks, Kubiak's son, they'll start getting some jobs. But I think you kind of looked around. I think the Washington's a good example. I thought it would be insane for Seattle to hire. Like, John, you've been a GM now for 14 years. Take a big swing. And if Ben Johnson's not interested, like, I understood going with Mike McDonald. But if you're Washington, you go, we have a culture issue. Like, this franchise has been just negative. We had issues. He is a positive culture guy. So maybe he's not some superstar coach, but can he just get the train on the tracks? Can he help a young quarterback? And just in 3 or 4 years, we go, you know what? We have a real organization. And then maybe you have to make a decision. Do we need to upgrade the coach or whatever? But you get a guy with real experience. Josh Harris, his last 2 coaches in the NBA have been guys with a resume as a head coach. Clearly, they valued that. I do think that Ben Johnson, though, was a pretty big kind of wild card swing of whether it was the price, whether it was the interview. I was told a couple years ago, he just wasn't that comfortable. He's only 37 years old. It's not like he's 50. Maybe he's just like, I'm not quite ready. I'm making $4 million. It's not going anywhere. The Lions are going to be really good. But the moment he went back, who else were you going to hire?
Yeah. That's a great point.
But it's why these offensive coordinators, Cliff looks like he's going to Washington. Waldron, we'll see what Seattle ends up doing. I saw that they're interested in Ben Grubb. Went to Alabama with DeBoer. We might see in a year or two the crop of offensive coordinators, because if those offenses hit on some of those defensive-led teams, those guys jolt up, right? It happened to Shanahan with Dan Quinn. You get extra credit because you know that guy runs, he has so much juice in the building.
Looking for a super offer for Super Bowl 58? DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered. New customers can bet the big game. Bet just $5. That's it, $5, and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Takes about 90 seconds. Use the code Colin, COLIN. New customers bet $5, get $150 instantly in bonus bets for the big game. DraftKings, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Remember, redeem code Colin, COLIN. The crown is yours. All right, John Middlekauff joining us. For those listening to the podcast, former NFL scout. I do want to talk about this. I think it's interesting. Harbaugh, college football, rearview mirror. See ya. Saban had many good years left. Alabama still a top 3 program. College football, see ya. Boston College head coach, see ya. Chip Kelly rumored to be taking a coordinator job. I do think that college football is at a point where the transfer portal needs listen, the media is always going to defend the player. The media is always predictable, young. The media has gotten much younger in my career. Why? Because they're cheaper. As the media is getting more corporatized, that's why I love the volume. We pay what people we think are worth. We'll take older people that are a bit more expensive. I've worked for big media companies. They want cheap. Yeah. And cheap, young, idealistic media people always for the player. But the truth is, this transfer portal is imploding the coaching industry, because you literally spend all your time not only recruiting out, but in. You're recruiting your own players. And Jay Wright had another decade. He's like, I'm out. I understand. Krzyzewski could have remained. I'm done. Some of it is the NFL can pay coordinators a lot. But how much of this, it does feel like to me, where guys are like, unless you have a Clemson, Ohio State, but then I say that, and Michigan and Bama's coaches left. Are we going to get to a point where an athletic director now doesn't have to worry about a college job? These guys will just take a $3 million coordinator job and not have to recruit and deal with crap.
I went to cocktails with a guy in the SEC, or a scout that does the SEC, and he sat down with one of the main coaches. And he said one thing that has changed dramatically over the last couple of years with the NIL, and which is directly correlated with the transfer portal, is it's all one big transaction. Where before, if a guy was struggling, a younger player, it was your job as a college coach, one, just to help the human grow, but to help the player grow. Now, the moment, even if you're an 18, 19-year-old freshman or redshirt freshman, if you're getting paid $400,000, $500,000, it's one big, I'm treating you like the NFL. You're either getting done, we'll cut you, we want you to transfer. And the human element of that sport, which most of these guys playing college football are not going to the pros. it's the pinnacle of their life with their coaches, why they form these bonds. And it's all one big giant like stock market now. Even in the NFL, like I have a contract with you. I can't just tomorrow be like, I'm out, Colin. That's not the way the world works. And in college football, like Josh Allen, like, oh, we blew it. I'm just going to leave this offseason, right? We're in college, like, see, guys, I'm out. It always, well, the coaches always did it. Well, I mean, they didn't just leave to random programs. They usually typically upgraded the program. So, yeah, Kalen DeBoer left to Alabama.
Well, it's always funny whenever I hear that. Well, coaches, it's college. You're a college student. That's an administrator. College professors get tenure. College students don't. They're not even. A coach in college, the player's not even to a coach. The contract, not the way it works.
I also think the NIL, the amount of teams that can pay guys now at the rates in which they have to be compensated is dramatically smaller than the amount of Power 5 programs we have. So Jeff Hafley, who leaves Boston College to go to Green Bay, if you just look at all the people that cover college football like on the X or Twitter, this is great, the NIL. Boston College is probably a bottom 5 Power 5 job. Like they should end up just playing like Division I AA football moving forward. Like they have no shot. So if you're him, you're gonna get fired, right? Because 7 wins is your max. You can't pay anyone who's available. And if you get a good player who's young, he's gonna leave. The teams in your conference, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, they can pay him, let alone all the other programs. Green Bay can pay you $4 or $5 million. You go there. What if Green Bay is good at defense the next couple of years? And their team's obviously going to be good. He's an NFL head coach. Where at Boston College, he's going to get fired. I would say it was a indictment on the situation, which is obviously all out of whack. If he left a top 25 job, right? Damn, this guy left the University of Miami, or this guy left Texas or Oklahoma. He left Boston College, right? Ryan Day is not leaving to be a coordinator at Ohio State, right? He's staying there. Chip Kelly. Why does Chip Kelly want? Well, one, he knows Big Ten, I'm probably in some trouble. And two, like, they're going to fire me / this sucks. He never liked that element of the sport anyway. Now, would I hire him as my offensive coordinator? I mean, it seems like he tried to get one, didn't get one, but that's UCLA is not going to be able to compete with the NIL. Look at their basketball program. It's in shambles. They can't pay what these other programs are paying. So that's where I think the more and more money that comes to the SEC and the Big Ten, the top programs, the NIL they're paying. Look at Nebraska. Dominic Riola's kid, the number 1 quarterback. I played golf with a guy a week ago that played football at Nebraska that lives in that area. He's like, rumors in town is that guy got $4 million. $4 million, which is pretty risky with a high school kid. But that's the going rate to get in bed with these guys. But what if he sucks? Like, what if he's not good? Is that would you pay $4 million to a high school? This is not basketball at Anthony Davis. It's probably a 50-50 proposition. He's even a solid starter.
Well, I think I've argued this about Nebraska football. It is the only program that was great 30 years ago that will never come back. Now, I felt Notre Dame because of the isolation, the academic, the religious umbrella, but they've proven they can win when you get a great coach, Brian Kelly, and that's what he is. But Nebraska lived off Prop 48s. They lived in a world, once they left the Big 12, that means all those Texas recruits, well, mom and dad can't watch them every week. I thought that was a terrible strategy. I don't think Nebraska's ever coming back, and I think their fan base, full of wonderful, decent people, they still view themselves as this giant in college football, and I don't put them as a top 15 program. So for them to say, listen, it's an offensive league, NFL college football. We're going to pivot to an offensive coach, and we're going to have to pay to get great quarterback play. I think the only way Nebraska can be a 10-win team, the only way, is to do almost a Chip Kelly at Oregon, which is we're going to do stuff different. We're going to play a system in which we just really have all of our talent on offense. And if we don't win, we'll be absolutely wildly entertaining and lose shootouts to Michigan, Ohio State. I think Nebraska and I think Washington's been great, disappeared. I think most schools that have been great can come back. I think Nebraska's only way is to go get a star quarterback and a star offensive coach, and that's it.
Totally understand why they did it. It's why, like, for example, Oregon, you could argue moving forward, obviously was a really good job over the last 20 years. Is it a top 5 job in the country now if you factor in the resources they have for NIL?
Yes. Yeah. A top 7 at least.
When you have that, like the Cowboys, they have this huge brand, but if Jerry signs his own guys, they never have any free agent cap space. Right. So yeah, Jerry could have all this money, but who cares? He can't sign any free agents, right? He never has any room. Where in college, like Ohio State clearly spends the most right now. It's a huge, huge advantage, right? Oregon, like Dan Lanning, I'm sure Alabama offered him the job. He's like, no, I can win just as much here, and my path might even be easier in the Big Ten. And the funding I have, the access to money to sign these guys, because it's outrageous. Now, I think one thing that I've heard from a lot of college buddies is the power. The good part about the portal, when you're at one of the top programs, is you can improve the talent really fast. And when you have the money to cut them checks, an offensive lineman, a couple $100,000, a skill guy, maybe $300,000-$400,000, you can add 5-6 players. You're already recruiting well and mix that in, and you can get good fast. That's why I do think we'll see over the next couple of years, you'll see a team we knew was good all of a sudden be a national championship contender on a given year. They may not be able to sustain it like Ohio State or Alabama, but look at Lane. I just saw something on the internet today. Incredible year again in the transfer portal. He could have a season where could he win a national championship if it all goes right. Now, is he going to be able to sustain it for 10 years? It's probably hard at that program, like in Oregon, like in Alabama, like in LSU. But when you can pay these guys, that drives these coaches nuts. It's such a there has to be some sort of limit of you just can't leave whenever you want. That's not how anything in society works. And like you said, the media celebrates it, loves it. Of course they do. That's not the way the world works. Even in college, if I want to get said coach, I have to pay a buyout, right? You got to pay. There's something coming back the other way. Okay, even Green Bay, I want to get Jeff Hafley. I'm sure they had to cut a couple $1 million check to Boston College if there's a buyout. That's the way it works. Alabama had to pay for Kalen DuBois. As a player, it's like, see ya, I'm out of here. It's like, okay, this is it's not a sustainable model.
Yeah, and I think, and that's it's not. I mean, I do think college football is a buy. I got into this discussion with somebody because I like the business. I like sports, but I like the business. And I'll throw this at you. I said, the next 20 years, because I probably have about 15 left in this space.
I think you got 30. We're all younger now.
Yeah.
60 is the new 45.
Yeah. And I said, if you told me you can bet on 4 things going forward, you're a sports executive, and at Volume I kind of am, what would be the 4 things you would bet on? And I said, NFL football, college football, gambling, and the UFC. Fight, when well regulated and smartly managed, Dana White.
It works.
And the person said, well, what about the NBA? And I said, I love the NBA. It'll always have an audience. But I said, hockey, baseball, and the NBA are getting very international. And college football is very domestic. NFL's domestic. Gambling. I said, UFC is the fight business. I've always been a fan of it. They'll always be able, if you can stumble every couple of years into a Conor McGregor figure, it's just going to work. But when I said this, I like the NBA, but I've never felt in all the years I've watched it that the first half to the trading deadline was less relevant. I mean, they're already like 50 games in. I watch those Saturday night games, but I'm watching the numbers. It's getting international. I'm okay with it. But LeBron and Steph, they don't have the next guy. We know at the NBA, when Michael left, they lost 50% of their audience. So again, I'm not bashing the NBA. I'm a fan of it. But give me the future in a league that's becoming incredibly international. And the NFL has taken away their Christmas Day marketing tipping point day. Just said, nope, you're not going to do that anymore. That's done. So they basically stole. That was a big day for the NBA. They owned the biggest marketing day, Christmas, 4 games. And the NBA just squashed it.
What about Martin Luther King Day? Because of the weather, they did a doubleheader. Why wouldn't they do that moving forward? 2-2-2.
Yeah.
Having 2 games on everyone's home on Monday. There were games doing 300,000 people on Martin Luther King Day in the NBA. Like, that's not a sustainable model. I think, listen, I'm a great example. I grew up around an NBA town in Sacramento. I mean, everyone, when I grew up, idolized Mitch Richmond. When Michael came to town, it was the hottest ticket you could get. Why? Because you knew Michael would play. And the Kings sucked, and you knew Michael would show up. I mean, here's the problem. The Warriors are just not that good. I mean, Steph had 60 last night, and they lost. And the Lakers are holding on for dear life, right? I mean, you're talking two teams. Those guys are easily the most famous guys, and two guys that take a lot of pride in putting on a show. I think the sport, it has a lot of guys making a lot of money who just aren't worth the money. And it happens in basketball and football too, but let's think about football. Some guys get overpaid. But within a couple years, if they're not worth it, they get cut.
Oh, yeah.
In basketball, I signed a guy for $200 million. Well, you got to do it because he's a max player. Is he? He's like the 19th best player in the league. And then in 2 years, like, this is a disaster. And that started happening at a rate where, and then you start factoring in the guys not playing, the urgency of the league. I do think the NFL clearly for the foreseeable future is such a behemoth. It's just rolling. College, there's been an urgency with the regular season games. Like the Michigan-Ohio State game really mattered for definitely the last couple years, right? It felt like could be the national championship game. Now with both of them are going to be in the playoffs. Does that game still, you could argue in the NFL, it still feels like you knew the Ravens and the Niners were both going to the playoffs, and at Christmas night felt big. So maybe it will be unfazed.
I've had this discussion. I think the 12-game playoff will replace Auburn, Alabama, and Michigan, Ohio State to some degree as the game, because I think those guys could play a second time. So I've argued December college football always died. The Sun Bowl, you're always like, where's the sport?
Vegas Bowl, Holiday Bowl.
Now,
it didn't matter.
Great college football regular season. I get a playoff. So I think the sport died in December, lost its momentum, and then you're like in January, oh, there's a game in 3 nights. I think those games will replace the other big games.
There is also, if you're sitting at home on Saturday night and you're like Penn State, Michigan, whether both teams are going to the playoffs or not, there's a pageantry and intensity to the environment when you turn on your TV that's hard to turn off.
Yep.
You turn on LSU Ole Miss at night in Baton Rouge, you're sitting on the couch and watching for a little bit because that town, the fans care so much, and that will not be lost. Right, with the playoffs won't phase the regular season of the passion of the crowds. And think about the conferences that we're going to watch the most moving forward are going to be the SEC and the Big Ten. Well, who cares the most? Those two conferences. So part of it's the television product, right? Like part of a couple weeks ago when Steph and LeBron played, you're like, this doesn't look like the regular season NBA I'm used to watching
at all.
And I felt like, and maybe it's just, romanticizing about the past and what you grew up on, but it felt like a lot of regular season games for a long period of time in the NBA. People tried. And I think in society, when you like to get my attention and to get, the consumer's attention, when I turn on a sporting event, are you trying? Do I feel like you're giving, and in football, you do.
Yes.
Right. In baseball, it's just the nature of the sport. It's hard to tell. Like this is a terrible game. You turn it off. It doesn't matter. In basketball, like it felt like there's an urgency of the players beside the top couple guys that has been mostly lost throughout the course of a season. And that doesn't resonate with people in 2024 when I got a million options. I couldn't find a movie last night and I got 17 streaming services. But I eventually find one because I'm going to click on enough. We have so many things to watch that I think it's never been harder to break through. And, obviously people just, as you age, you get less dependent on like, I have to watch this because I don't feel it matters. And the one thing football is always going to have, whether you're a college football fan or an NFL fan, it's just one game a week. Yeah. It's 3 hours. It's pretty easy to consume.
And that matters more now because we're all more caffeinated. People are working second jobs. Scarcity was an advantage. It's now a significant advantage. People are on their phones more. The phones replace the television. They're just distracted constantly. So the one game a week was always an advantage. It now feels like unattainable for any sport to catch the NFL. And I think next year you're going to start seeing like 10 ratings nationally for some of these 12 to 15s for the early round playoffs, 18, 20s for the later rounds. Those are that's doubling the NBA finals. Those are big boy numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to being a kid and going. I remember seeing Allen Iverson score 50 in Sacramento. Like that version of Allen Iverson is not playing against a 20-win NBA team. And I think the moment that they've really struggled with that, and I know they've tried to put in some rules about playing. When you make $50 million, I'm sorry, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want whenever I want, and the
Yeah.
money's guaranteed. It's just a structure of the contract. It's the best thing the NFL is going for. Is I'm not beholden to a player for a 7-year contract if he's not good enough. If you keep producing, we'll keep paying. But if you're not, like they move on. So all these free agents that sign these big deals, within a couple of years, half of them are on a different team because they're not worth the money.
Finally, we wrap it up, John Middlekauff. When you live in California, it's fascinating to see how many people that don't live in California or never have strong opinions about it. But I thought about you this week because I had another friend, a family leaving California. Now, the taxes here have always been high, but the expense now is high with the taxes, and it just kind of feels like it's endless. It's going up. The politics aside, it's priced out a lot of people. You make a very good living. You moved to Arizona. So I was thinking about you. Um, Arizona doesn't have the Mediterranean weather, but it's got a lot of sun. What is the move financially, emotionally, if you address those? How has it been for you?
I would say it's been incredible. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever done. Uh, I would say this though about California. There are like three separate places, right? There's Southern California, there's kind of the greater Bay Area, and then there's the Central Valley. And my dad was a tomato farmer. So, I grew up in the Sacramento Central Valley area, which is a lot different politically than the Bay Area or even,
Right.
LA. When living in the Bay Area, the price, it's not sunny like LA or San Diego. The weather is dramatically different. So you pay the same prices, if not more expensive, right? You could argue it's the most expensive place, certain areas in America. And it was just like, I don't like being here anymore. So when I made the move, one, financially, what I'm doing, it made a lot more sense. I needed kind of a jolt and a change. And I don't regret it at all. And I live in a nice house now on right down the street from a golf course that the equivalent in Palo Alto or Danville, California, would have been for way less, way more money. It just didn't pencil anymore for me. And I love San Diego. Like I started going more and more to Southern California growing up because of sports. You're like, I hate the Dodgers, I hate the Lakers. And then as you get older, you go down there, like, damn, but the Bay Area doesn't feel like that. In the
Yeah.
city, it's a different world up there. I didn't like it as much anymore. And yeah, obviously the taxes wise, but they're just a way of life. Part of it is I do think Vegas and Scottsdale, just a lot of California people. So there's an energy. Businesses are coming here,
Yes.
which it probably didn't feel like that 20 years ago or 15 years ago. There's an energy that I like here that I would imagine the Bay Area had 15, 20 years ago. I feel like the Bay Area changed dramatically. I can't speak to Southern California because I have a lot of friends that live in San Diego and they love it.
Well, it's funny. So years ago when I was doing local, I don't know if I've ever told the story before, probably have, but when the ESPN opening came and I left local. So I had told my that time wife, I said, I'm going to go national or just stay in Portland. The only exception would be KNBR in San Francisco. I love that city. So that was like 19 years ago. I would move there. You couldn't pay me to move to the Bay Area, even though there's so much I love about it. But it's dirtier. It's different. I went there for the Super Bowl several years ago, and I'm like, I went to the same restaurant 3 times. I'm like, there were just parts of the town I was in by a nice hotel. I didn't feel, I'm a man.
Colin, it's dramatic. That was 2016. It's sad what happened. I mean, it's one of the great cities in the world, and right now it's falling apart. And
Yeah.
there's no putting. I don't believe New York City is a good example, and I lived in Philly, so I kind of know and I know you lived out there for. There's a wiring of East Coast people, even a Democratic, which is the majority of people in Philly or New York. They'll draw a line in the sand, like
Yeah.
enough of this bullshit. I don't think that's happening in San Francisco because there's this identity politics. The moment you say like the criminal's wrong, it's kind of jumped the shark, and I don't think you're getting it back. Now, I didn't live in the city,
Yeah.
I lived in the suburbs, but you could feel just the change in everything that it was, and a lot during COVID. It was the most extreme. That was another thing. I came to Arizona. Nothing changed here, and that wasn't. I didn't see eye to eye with a lot of people, and I was tired of arguing, tired of being negative about it. So I'm just going to remove myself from the situation.
Yeah.
And I did. And I don't, the other thing, it's an hour and a half flight. If I want to go back to see my mom in Sacramento, LA's an hour away, Vegas an hour away. Everything's pretty easy to get around out here. So
yeah, no, I've been watching you and I see your posts, how happy you are. Yeah. When I went to the Super Bowl in San Francisco, and I'm socially, I'm a pretty left-leaning guy. But my son now lives in Portland, and it's gotten. I mean, it's always been damp, but there are parts of town I don't want to walk around in. And I'm a 6'2", 195-pound guy that works out. I'm not somebody that's bothered by, somebody that's on the street. Like, I'm not bothered by it.
Yeah.
And I try to be compassionate. But San Francisco, when I was at that Super Bowl years ago, I stayed at the Mark Hotel, I think it was called. It was up on the hill. And I'd walk around there at night, and I'm like, how does a woman walk around here? Like, I don't get it at all.
Yeah, it's not safe.
It's not. So I'm glad that's worked for you, because I've seen some friends leave California. My wife's not a big fan of California, and I just was kind of interested in your take, because I think
you did this too. Sometimes, not that, I mean, everything was going well professionally, but you almost get a jolt of energy when you make a move. And I've been lucky enough through work, been in Philadelphia, California, do this. Yeah, I feel just rejuvenated.
Yes.
It is not even about, the taxes or the politics. It's just something about just waking up in a different space that makes you just meet new people, get new ideas. And it's incredible. And that you can't pay for that. There's nothing you can do to pay for that.
I've moved cross country 3 times. I don't regret any of them. There's no question. It's made my life fuller and broader. I have so many friends. I have great friends in Rhode Island, great friends in Connecticut, Northwest. You don't get it if you stay in your hometown in, Carmel, Indiana, which is a beautiful burb. I got no problem with it, but there is something to challenge yourself a little bit. So I'm glad you've crushed it. I watch your Twitter, I watch your social stuff, and I'm like, you seem happy. Of course, it always helps when you have an attractive person in your life.
She's done well.
I love that.
When are you going out to Vegas, Colin?
I'm flying in for the volume party. I'm on that treadmill, that host treadmill, so I got to be in LA. So I'm flying out. I try to fly with the peeps, have to do private to get in, party, 3 sales meetings, cocktail, back in a plane, fly out, get here at midnight, up at 6 a.m, do a show. So I'm just there for the party.
No shows in Vegas for you.
No. Fox, and I give Fox credit on this. When we have the Super Bowl, it's different.
Next year in New Orleans.
Yeah. So that'll be different. We'll probably go there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But Fox Sports has never been a company that's just going to do things because other people are doing them. And I sat down with management years ago, and I said, I think Radio Row is played out. If people want to do it,
big time.
I said, I thought at ESPN my last few years, I'm like, it's over. It's played out. Why are we
Half
doing
the
it?
interview is Joe Montana telling you about AARP or something. You're like, I don't even care.
Yeah. So it's like I felt sometimes at the other place they did things because they felt a need to do them, or it was in the history. Fox is very entrepreneurial. If it doesn't make financial sense, you got to talk them into doing it. And it's like, I told my bosses, I'm like, I think it's totally played out. I said, if you go Monday and if, strangely, the Monday of Super Bowl week, there's been major breaking NBA trade stories.
Yeah.
And so it's like I said, Monday, Tuesday, do it from home. If you want to do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm flying back Friday to be with my family. But I think I'm not a believer in doing things because grandpa did them and dad did them. And Fox, to their credit, I will say this, of all the companies I work for, and I've worked for several corporations, they have their own path. They do not care if everybody else is doing something. You can see it from Fox News. They're going to do what they believe in. And as a sportscaster, we just don't do shit because everybody else is doing it. And I love that about Fox Sports.
We'll see you at the party Wednesday, and beers on you.
Yes, they are. Good seeing you, buddy.
Okay, see you, Colin.